let's move on with this economic analysis of the United States to a more global sense. Off of the Milken Institute meetings, William Lee joins us, their chief economist. Bill Lee, can the markets constrain or restrict the Fed? If we look at the Bloomberg Financial Conditions Index, it's sort of doing its job right now, making financial conditions more restrictive. How will the Fed react to that?
Well, right now, the markets are doing 110% of the Fed's job because the market increases are way above where, as John just said, actual increases, but also the expectations of that aggressive policy stance is something that the markets have clearly priced in. And I think it's based on some misguided information. My colleague, former colleague Andrew, is an example of that, where he's focused on the aggregate wage price numbers. And I've been looking at the micro wage price numbers, and I really don't see massive signs of a wage price spiral as 1970 style. In fact, most of the wage increases have been going to where the labor shortages are appearing, the low wage workers, the younger tenured workers.
Billy, you're world famous for this, and it goes into a decile analysis, I would guess. Economists like Citigroup love to aggregate numbers together. What part of that decile analysis matters for Chairman Powell in the view forward?
Well, Chairman Powell absolutely cares about the aggregate number, but do you see aggregate wage price spiral? Now, granted, the Fed has lost credibility since its meetings. The average inflation rate break-evens that are priced into 5-year securities is way above 3.5%. But given that, I think we shouldn't get too carried away with how much the Fed has to tighten. Don't forget, the Fed, for the first time in Fed history, we have two policy tools, the balance sheet and rates. And I think one of the strategies that they haven't talked about enough is using that balance sheet to cool off and target those red hot sectors in real estate and consumer durables by draining the liquidity from there, especially the mortgage backs, and by then easing up on the amount of rate increases they'll need. This is, again, the first time in history of the Fed with two policy instruments, it may be able to escape crashing the economy to bring inflation down to its target level.
Bill, some of that in the market ended in a bit of a mess in 2018 when they tried to wind down the balance sheet. They're doing this at a much more aggressive level, twice the speed, once they get going. Bill, can you just add a little bit more color to that? How much they're about to do with the balance sheet and how this is going to work through the economy, through financial conditions?
This is one of the great uncharted territory because the Fed has really never done balance sheet before. And as you said, the last time it did it in a very clumsy way. Right now, it has to be very careful in using that mortgage-backed securities holdings because that is where the real red hot sector is, the real estate market. And draining liquidity there is going to be absolutely critical. But now the Treasury runoff is something that will be done on almost autopilot because it has maturity holdings that are so short. But I think the key to the Fed's policy stance is how aggressive does it have to be with rates on top of that. If you really believe that there's a wage price spiral being priced in, then it has to be aggressive, no doubt. But my view of the numbers on the labor market is such that, you know, if you're above the median wage or median profile of the median worker, you're not getting the 10, 12% wage increases. You're getting barely 2 and 3% for senior managers. So I think the Fed has to cool off a bit in terms of worrying so much about that wage price spiral. There really is no sign of it yet taking hold. And I think that's something that Wall Street has missed entirely.
Even so, if the Fed is targeting inflation, even if it's not coming from the wage price spiral, there are so many inflationary pressures coming from China, from the supply chain disruptions, which are not necessarily positive for growth, which are not necessarily signs of momentum, but still the Fed has shown a willingness to target demand in order to respond to supply side responses. What's your view on how far they would have to go to normalize the supply and demand side of the equations?
Well, that's the lesson learned from the 70s. You cannot let prices get out of control. Even though a lot of the inflation is coming from the supply side, the Fed's job is to equilibrate supply and demand. If you can't get supply up, then you certainly have to bring demand down. And the wrong way to do it, though, is through hit targeting investment, which is the cost of capital. Right now, I think the key to inflation in the future is productivity-enhancing investment. That has to be encouraged. And I think the Fed to choke that off just for the sake of hitting its 2% target in a reasonable amount of time would be a serious mistake because that would cost us in the 3 to 5 year horizon in boosting inflation without those productivity-enhancing investments.
Right now, we've got a 2-year Treasury yield at about 2.5%. The team over at Bank of America, which we'll catch up with John in a little bit here, believe that it will go up to 3.5%. Do you think that that would be enough to torpedo this economy, to actually send the United States into recession?
It would be enough if we drain liquidity adequately from the red-hot sectors using the balance sheet. It will not be enough by traditional measures. And so I think that this, as I said, has got to be a time when the Fed can no longer say the balance sheet is the passive tool and the secondary tool. It has to become the primary tool for cooling the economy. And as far as China is concerned, by the way, the real key to watch is whether or not China becomes aggressive and takes over more aggressive about Taiwan. Because the lesson learned from Ukraine that shocked the leaders over there is that the world came together and became much more cohesive. That will put a stopper, I think, on military incursions into Taiwan, but it won't stop their cyber attacks or political strategies. So there, the supply constraint is a real issue because TSMC is global. There is no substitute for advanced chips. We can find other places to buy wheat. We can find other places to grow corn, but we cannot find another TSMC.
But just quickly, within the Communist Party, do you think that the leader, President Xi, is in a position where he can make a step as bold as the one that you just described?
Right now, if he gets his third term, the one thing on Xi's mind is that he will leave the legacy that he created the path of returning Taiwan to China. This is something no one has accomplished. Deng Xiaoping, no one, not even Zhou Enlai or Mao Zedong. And so this has been a China obsession for decades, ever since China opened. So you betcha he's going to be going after Taiwan. The question is how. And right now, the world coming together about Ukraine, I think, has put a stopper on any overt military actions.
Bill, wonderful to hear from you, sir. As always, Bill Lee there of the Milken Institute. Tom, with a different perspective, and for some people, a worrying perspective on future developments.
Well, and this is Bill Lee of the Pacific Rim and, of course, his work of IMF. I would say this is an undercurrent, John, where, yes, there's this huge focus on Ukraine. We understand that. But I would suggest there's an undercurrent of new analysis on Taiwan and then down to the South China Sea, particularly after the Philippine election. That's maybe something to talk about in the fall.
Coming up in the next hour, we'll catch up with Mark Cavanagh, the head of U.S. rate strategy.